You might remember in May this year, a British soldier was run down and hacked to death in a London street by two Islamic extremists. Tomorrow, the verdict in that case will be handed down. The murder sparked furious street protests from right-wing groups who saw Rigby's death as evidence that Islamic extremists were hell-bent on destroying Britain's way of life. The noisiest of those groups, the English Defence League, was led by a charismatic former plumber called Tommy Robinson. But since then, Mr Robinson has walked away from it all, and his former comrades consider him a traitor. Tommy Robinson has even told the ABC's Europe correspondent, Philip Williams, that he expects to be assassinated.
The English Defence League has a hard-fought reputation. A sometimes violent show of anger and frustration, often directed towards the UK's Muslims.
It's out of order. Do you think it's good? What do you think of Islam?
The government is standing up for the terrorists. As far as I'm concerned, the government are allowing the terrorists to do what they're doing.
This is England, bruv. Our f***ing country.
And this is the founder and leader of the EDL, Tommy Robinson, the charismatic glue that had held disparate regional groups together.
Now we've built a generation of people who are too scared to say anything in case they get called a racist. What has happened to English men?
The shocking murder of soldier Lee Rigby in London earlier this year added fuel to the simmering tensions between EDL supporters and anti-fascist protesters.
Some of your members, EDL members, very angry people, possibility of violence, threats of violence. Were you worried that someone was going to end up dead?
Well, to be honest, am I worried that someone's going to end up dead? They did. Lee Rigby had his head cut off. 52 people killed in London Underground. That's why we formed. As it progresses, the way I had to weigh it up is, what is it we want? And to solve the problem, we've made a noise now. People have listened.
While Lee Rigby's murder gave Tommy Robinson the perfect platform to galvanise public anger, the protests also added to his legal worries. He was charged with obstructing police at one demonstration.
What are you worried about today? No, of course I'm not. I'm innocent.
He was recently back in court. The obstruction charge was thrown out, but his record stands: convictions for assault, drug offences and passport fraud.
Since the English Defence League, the police have thrown everything at me. They've persecuted me. They've froze my bank accounts 3.5 years ago for supposed tax evasion. They've arrested my wife. They've arrested all my family. If they spent as much time persecuting Islamist extremists as they have me, the English Defence League would never have formed.
7-7 when they massacred 52 and took the limbs of 700 in our capital. Was there any outrage?
But despite his high public profile, privately Tommy Robinson was having serious doubts about the organisation he had created. He feared he was losing the battle to keep neo-Nazi and other extremists out of the EDL, and concluded the street protests had run their course. At a surprise press conference, he and his deputy, Kevin Carroll, shocked everyone. They were leaving the EDL and teaming up with their former sworn enemies.
And when I looked at that Manchester demonstration and I saw flags and signs, white pride flags, I saw things that did not represent me.
If we don't do this, where do you think this is going to end up? In 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a sectarian type of combat conflict, which we don't want, which nobody wants.
What was even more surprising was the company he was now choosing. The Quinlan Foundation is an anti-extremist think tank made up in part by former Muslim extremists once involved in violence.
And as I said, we may not agree on everything going forward, but the fact that they've made this gesture, it must be accepted, it must be welcomed, because the alternative was to have the EDL still out there on our streets. And that's not an alternative that I'm sure many of us would want, and I know certainly Muslims wouldn't want.
We have to work together to solve this problem, and who better to learn from than someone that spent 17 years at the head of an Islamist organisation? I want to understand that ideology inside out in order to defeat it and bring it down.
Tommy Robinson's conversion towards dialogue rather than confrontation happened in prison as he served time for a passport offence earlier this year.
It's the best thing that happened to me. And that 18 weeks gave me a break from my incredibly stressful and pressurised life, and it gave me time to evaluate everything I was doing, how I was doing it and what I wanted. And the main thing for me was what I wanted and what I want. And I want peace and I want to bring about change, and that's when I decided back then that us and them is not going to solve the problem.
Moments before our interview, Tommy Robinson was talking to police. In this letter, they informed him he should consider moving because of a new threat.
After embracing Islam, Shakir went on to study the fundamentals of Islam and jihad.
This Al-Shabaab video named him, along with moderate Muslim preachers, as legitimate targets. Tommy Robinson and his family were now at risk because of his high-profile campaign against Islamic extremism.
Police have offered you a new life, a new identity. Why haven't you taken it?
Because all then that, who's going to have to do what I'm doing and say what I'm saying? My son. I don't want my boy to have to fight for his country. I don't want him to have to fight for his freedoms. Our freedoms are under attack. Our culture's under attack. And I want to be the man that's battling for it, not my son.
Non-Muslims give me support and Muslims just hate me, you know what I mean?
Every time he walks the streets of hometown Luton, there's potential for trouble. Despite leaving the EDL, he says he was recently attacked by local Muslims.
They come out of this shop, three of them, just one of them just caught me. I went up against shutters. Where's the shutters? There must be those shutters there next to the chicken shop.
You'd expect the Christians to be attacking the Muslims, but they're not.
Tommy Robinson admits he was guilty of generalising about all Muslims when his focus should have been against extremists. The man who wears his heart on his sleeve and his socks now says he wants to set up a think tank.
A think tank that's got credibility, that's accepted as a voice for working class people in this country. There's a big massive void between how people feel and what the governments say, because there's this like common sense area that no one's speaking, and the reason why is everyone's fearful and scared to speak. Now, I want to be the person that speaks for those people.
It's been an extraordinary transformation for the plumber-turned-politician. His methods have changed, his goals haven't. He just hopes he lives long enough to see them through.
How old are you?
I'm 30.
Do you think you'll make 40?
Probably not. I'm surprised I made it at 30.